Can TikTok be trusted with our data?
And can Canon's new 8K cameras and free cloud storage tempt consumers?
Vertical Hold is proudly brought to you by Aussie Broadband, changing the game with their award-winning network and Australian-based support. Hi there, welcome to Vertical Hold Behind the Tech News, the weekly podcasts where we catch up with Australia's leading technology journalists to get the stories behind the big tech news of the week. I'm Adam Turner, and I'm joined as always by Alex Kidman, a man who's going to need to don the eye patch and do his best Snake Plissken impression to help me escape from Melbourne. Snake, what's the plan?
Look, I don't want to say too much because obviously the authorities are listening. All I will say to them is, when the gigantic wooden quokka rolls over the border, remember that thing is a protected species, and just because Cold Chisel is blaring from its backside, you've got no reason to interfere with it.
All right, I'll grab Ernest Borgnine and we'll be right there. We're also joined in the virtual Vertical Hold studio this week by longtime friend of the show, Picker AU editor Lee Stark. Lee, welcome back to the show. How's things in COVID land?
They're okay. I'm not locked down, so I'm clearly not as unlucky as you. But I'm going to be joining on that surfboard out of the lava into, I don't remember any of the escape from LA or New York. So I'm just gonna wing it. We're gonna get you out of there, Adam. We'll get you out of there somehow.
So later we're going to talk to Lee about Canon's new high-end cameras and its cloud initiative. But first, earlier we caught up with ABC News internet reporter Cameron Wilson to find out what's the latest with TikTok security concerns. So Cameron, welcome to the virtual Vertical Hold studios. What's been helping you survive the COVID-19 dramas?
I've been social distancing, so that's helped literally survive. But also been running a bit. I've recently bought my first turtleneck sweater, so that's been keeping me warm. So, I guess I've been, doing a few new things.
The tactical turtleneck? I'm not sure if you're an Archer fan.
No, it's more of a kind of a grey colour, so it might stand out a little bit, but it
at least you won't be mistaken for Steve Jobs.
That's exactly right. It is a bit techie, actually.
So, as most people know, TikTok is one of those free social media apps that all the cool kids are using, and it lets you make short videos, mostly dancing, and share them online. It's the next big thing. It's got 1.6 million users in Australia and 800 million around the world. Now, we all know, Cameron, that seemingly free apps tend to come at a cost in terms of privacy and data. But why are people particularly concerned about TikTok?
I mean, the reason is because it is a Chinese company that owns it. It's owned by ByteDance, and people are concerned about what that means for, I guess, in terms of the Chinese government being able to access data that the company might have. I guess for reference, I think you'd probably say it's the first English language Chinese app that's been really popular around the world. I know there's things like WeChat, but this really has kind of gone, everywhere. And people are really worried about, well, hey, what could be done with, for instance, the data on this app? What will the influence of the Chinese government be? And, the laws that they have, what will that influence be on how the app is, moderated? Will there be even like attempts to, spread misinformation? So for all these reasons, and, not all of them necessarily have been substantiated, but for all these reasons, people are, they have raised some concerns about the app.
So is there things in particular that it's been data that it's been gathering, or the way the app's been behaving that has particularly got people concerned?
Yeah, the thing is, I'm not sure that there is one thing that people are pointing to that has really raised alarm bells, because the truth is most social media apps, and in fact most apps, they all take a lot of data from you, probably more than what most people realize. So, I mean, if you look at the permissions that the app has, it has things like, it takes your location, looks at your contacts, obviously, the photos and files that you have on your phone. All these things are kind of, I guess, pretty standard, but even still, it is worth it is still worth being concerned over because, like any application taking this data and what they can learn from that and what they can use that data for, it kind of is concerning of itself. Now, there was something that was going around a couple of days ago about someone who had claimed to reverse engineer the app. I think people kind of poured a bit of cold water on that, saying that some more sensationalist claims weren't necessarily proven. But I guess the reason that I mention that is not to kind of, spread that rumor, but just to more be like, the way that these apps work, they are, they're closed boxes. It's hard to exactly know, how the information is being used once it's left you, and what it could be even used for in the future. So I guess it's not just what we do know about it, but what people, I guess, don't know about it that has some people concerned.
It's also been flagged, and to be fair to TikTok, it's not the only one, with the upcoming iOS beta as an app that seems to peer into whatever you've got copied on your clipboard. This is something that the new iOS version actually alerts you to. And to be fair, a lot of apps are doing this. But when it's already got this other shadow of suspicion, it's not exactly surprising that people are a bit more nervous about it, is it?
No, exactly right. I mean, like, there's really two aspects here at play. There's the fact that most apps, particularly social media apps, they take a lot of data for you. And for the most part, these apps are monetizing the information they get off you, often to sell advertising back to you. So that is in itself already a big thing. And I think some people might say that that's something that many of us are not actually paying enough attention to. So there's that, combined with the fact that this is an app that is owned by a Chinese company. We do know that the Chinese government, has a lot of, I guess, there's reporting of espionage and all kinds of things. Anyway, I guess the point is, like, people are concerned about how the Chinese government is using the powers that it has. Those kind of combined mean that people are particularly alert to the security risks around this. I guess, to be fair, not without reason, but it is also, I guess, worth kind of keeping that in mind, being like, well, if we're concerned about this, should we be concerned about all of the apps doing that? And I think the answer is yes, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't also, appreciate that there are unique and different risks associated with TikTok.
So TikTok says that its data is stored in Singapore and then it wouldn't hand it over to Chinese authorities. But that's not how it works in China, is it? If you're a Chinese company, then you have to play ball with the Chinese government when they ask for something.
Yeah, that's my understanding of it. I have to admit, I'm not a foreign policy expert, but my understanding is that, of course, there are laws that kind of oblige people who are Chinese citizens and companies to essentially assist in any intelligence gathering. There are also concerns raised by places like the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, that they have fears that there are essentially Chinese Communist Party people installed in tech companies like ByteDance. So, that could be one way that the Chinese government might still be having some influence and access to information without actually using these laws. And then there's also the fact that if you want to operate in China, you have to kind of, you might not even have to respond to a government demand. You might just choose to acquiesce, to choose to, moderate your platform in some kind of way, because you don't want to have that actual intervention by the government. So for all these reasons, there clearly are fears about how some of their national security laws could be used to access TikTok data, but it is not just limited to those laws.
And to be fair, the reason why the Americans might suspect that the Chinese plant people within China, the Chinese government plants people within Chinese businesses, is because the Americans do the same thing. The NSA does the same thing. So they're like, maybe you're doing what we're doing.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, I think that's the thing. There is clearly a strong fear of China, and we're currently seeing them as a superpower. The world's coming to terms with that. But also, traditionally there has been not as much focus and scrutiny, I would say, generally, on how some of the other world powers have been involved in espionage and other things. I'm not an expert on this. I can't say, I haven't actually specifically reported this stuff myself. But there are, we are part of the Five Eyes. We do know that the Five Eyes has surveillance on the rest of the world. To some extent, I'm sure that places, companies like ByteDance feel that the scrutiny placed on them is unfair compared to other people. that being said, I don't necessarily think that the ideal outcome is for us to be like, well, like, it's happening. Other places are doing it, so let's not worry about TikTok. I think the appropriate way to be kind of dealing with this is looking into, well, what kind of transparency measures do we need from all social media companies about, like, for instance, when governments request data, what kind of transparency measures do we need to make sure that all citizens around the world can feel comfortable about how their information is being used and if it's being accessed by any foreign government or even domestic government.
So, Cam, there's also some Australian politicians that are calling for the app to be banned in Australia. Being politicians, do you think they understand the tech? Are they looking at the security concerns, or are they just jumping on the bandwagon?
Look, I mean, I think it's a bit of both. There have been politicians for a while who have raised the alarm about TikTok. Andrew Hastie was very vocal about it at the start of the year. George Christensen came out in this month and said it should be banned, along with WeChat and other Chinese social media apps. I mean, it is kind of complicated. I was speaking to someone, cybersecurity expert today, who was saying that, there are many policy solutions that we might choose to have, but banning something is such a broad, it's a big, blunt instrument that it means that, that there are other options that we have. We don't necessarily just need to go for that. But I also think the other thing to kind of keep in mind on is that, there has been a few days of media coverage at the start of this week about there are calls to ban TikTok. But really, I haven't actually seen calls. I've seen a call. I've seen George Christensen. I've seen other people raise concerns about it. But of course, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're saying that we should, stop people having Australia using it. They're saying we need to figure out ways that we should deal with it. And one of the main ways that, the government is approaching this at the moment is with its Senate inquiry into foreign interference through social media. And this essentially is a committee that's being like, hey, we need to figure out what we do and don't allow in our democracy through social media. And that's actually like a tougher question than you might think to answer, because, I guess the question is, what is foreign interference? Is it like, there was that a few weeks ago, there was that story about how teens on TikTok and also K-pop fans, like, Korean pop fans, had trolled the Trump campaign by signing up for heaps of tickets to the campaign. Well, if people were doing that from other countries, is that technically foreign interference? Or say, hey, if I am, not an American citizen, but I want to say that I want to, I support a presidential candidate and I tweet about that, and maybe I even like online fundraise, is that foreign interference? The thing is, it's quite complicated. It's hard to know exactly where the line is. That's what the inquiry is kind of looking into at the moment. And the chair of that committee, Labor Senator Jenny McAllister, she said that I want to look at this and I would like TikTok to appear before the committee so we can ask them about this.
It is a really blurry line, because you're right. There's that personal level that's hard to discern. And I mean, obviously, if a company wanted to hire people to do fake profiles, and we know fake profiles are a thing on lots of social media services, then you wouldn't necessarily be able to spot that. But I guess there is a responsibility for these actual carriers as well, in terms of how they conduct themselves on their service, even how they moderate.
Yeah, totally. I mean, the thing is, at the end of the day, these are companies, and what they're trying to do is they're trying to make money, and they do that by, creating a customer experience. And I think a lot of people would probably say that a customer, that your user experience on an app is probably affected by if there are massive disinformation campaigns going on. But I guess, they've also got to deal with the regulation that countries make around this, and that's really where of course, like, Australian politicians can use the stick to say you should be doing something about this. It is complicated, and that's the problem for the moment for lawmakers is that, well, we know that these campaigns are happening. We know that there's the US presidential election. There was in fact other ASPI, who I mentioned before. They've kind of documented a series of attempts to interfere with politics. We know it happens, but at the moment we don't really have any way of kind of dealing with it. The first step to, I guess, finding out how we're going to deal with it is, of course, establishing what it is, and then we can start to demand more from platforms.
All right, Cameron, well, thanks for joining us for the first time and letting us know all about what's happening with TikTok, and I guess we'll have to see how it plays out.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
So we live in socially isolated times where cameras are pretty much the thing that people have on their smartphones, and the space of dedicated cameras feels very niche. But Canon's decided that now is the time to launch some new, reasonably high-end models. Lee, I know you're a man who loves his cameras. What's exciting about these new Canon devices?
All right, so there are two coming out. It's a big deal for Canon, not just because it's a play in the mirrorless space, which is something they did take a while to get into. You know, both Nikon and Canon, one of the two of the longest, I guess, holdouts for mirrorless joined because, for the most part, Sony was doing incredibly well. And Canon launched the R series about a year or two ago, and this effectively it was their version of what a mirrorless camera would be. It took a new lens format, but it was still emphasis on very large lenses with lots of high quality glass. And in the time since, they've been working on kind of trying to make them a little bit better. I'm not normally a Canon photographer, but I have Canons in my life. These could tempt me over, partially because one of them, the R5, which is kind of the flagship model here, actually supports 8K video, which is new for not just for the mirrorless world, but for cameras in general. We've only really seen 8K videography on, I guess, the phones of this year, which, as we all know, has 8K from a tiny sensor is not going to be fantastic, or from the high-end cinema world where you can pick up like a Red camera or something made by some other high-end brand, and obviously spend a lot of money to capture this. You'll probably be spending a reasonable amount less, but you'll be getting high quality imagery and the support for 8K in the R5, whereas the R6, the other model, gives you a slightly smaller sensor, which is drops from 45 megapixels down to 21 or 20.1 rather, but gives you 4K as well. And those are two fairly compelling options when you think of someone who is entering enthusiast photography or even professional level photography. I can see them targeting wedding photographers and also people who love to shoot video.
I was going to say, you'd have to be a pro to want an 8K camera. I couldn't think of why any consumer would feel any kind of need to shoot in 8K at this point.
I mean, you do have 8K TVs gradually getting out there, and one of the problems, as we all know, with 8K TVs is there's literally nothing for them.
To watch.
Nothing exists, and it doesn't matter where you turn to. There's not even a whole lot of 8K demo videos out there. Remember when 4K videos popped up and everyone was saying, 4K TVs, and it was like, you can download the demo videos. There were some. Yeah. There are virtually none. So you're right. There's not a lot of need for 8K, but I can see the people who are starting to plan their own productions. This supports 8K RAW, which is, again, a format which is mostly geared at professionals because most people don't shoot raw video at the best of times. So 8K RAW is definitely targeted at professionals, but it gives Canon that little bit of an edge for people who do want to shoot their weddings in the highest quality that it ever existed, or who want to shoot in 4K and get a different type of sample out, because you can use that 8K sensor to produce a higher quality 4K video image if you want to.
And I know these new cameras have some fairly insane inbuilt stabilization, don't they?
Yeah, it's something that I think Canon's been a bit slow to adopt, but it's nice to see here. The stabilization on them is now a combination of both inbuilt in the camera and inbuilt in the lens. There's a bit of a catch with that. If you have the really new lenses made for the R series, the ones that are coming out now, it will let you stop up to about 8 stops in stabilization, which is impressive because it means you may not need a tripod for capturing a lot of things. If you have older lenses, and I know this is an ongoing thing, where a lot of people in the Canon system have older lenses, it can still work with the in-camera stabilization, and it may work with the lens stabilization in them, but they may not work the same way. And I was told that the amount of stabilization you get isn't necessarily going to be quite as dramatic. It will still be there, but basically, as with most things we see in cameras, if you buy the brand new thing, you'll get the best features. It's kind of like a car, I guess, or a phone. If you buy the brand new things, you'll get the best features. If you have the older ones, you'll still get some of them, but it won't be quite the same.
Okay, and both of these new cameras, I nearly said phones there, I'm so used to phone cameras, but both of these new cameras have dual memory card slots there. Now, is this just a question of saying, well, instead of throwing in, one high capacity card, you can throw in two? Is there anything else going on there?
One of the reasons people have two memory cards slots on big cameras is because if you're a pro or a wedding photographer or something like that, you tend to want to split how you shoot. So you'll shoot RAW to one and JPEG to another. These cameras now support HEIF format, which is actually the same format that comes on the iPhone. And you recognize it typically because HEIF is kind of like the new JPEG. I don't know how we're pronouncing that yet, by the way. This could be the new GIF or GIF or whatever it is. How do you want to pronounce it?
If you're shooting for Playboy, HEF.
Hef, because let's call this the Hef format. It's sexy because it supports more color, I think. Wow, there are so many ways we could take this. Either way, the Hef format.
Think of the children.
We are. The Hef and the Hef format. And so basically the idea is Hef is a new version of JPEG effectively that allows you to support more color because it supports higher dynamic range. That's why the iPhone uses it. And it supports it here too. So you could technically support or shoot RAW and HEF. The other reason, so the R6 has two SD slots. The R5 needs a different type of slot. It uses a new generation of compact flash. And the reason is because 8K doesn't quite shoot to SD. It's just a bit too slow at the moment. So at the bitrate they support here, they recommend using the CF Express, CF Fast, one of them, card slot for the R5.
Okay, so Canon has new devices. The obvious competitor there is Nikon. Do they have anything similar to these cameras?
Nikon has technically three mirrorless cameras out, and Nikon's gone through different types of mirrorlesses over the years, but the ones that would compete are the Z6 or Z6 and Z6 and Z7. Wow, I really need coffee today. And or we were just talking too much about HEF. And neither of these are technically relatable just yet. There's an expectation that we'll see updates this year. I think Sony's probably closer in line to competing with these cameras. I don't think there is a Sony 8K mirrorless out yet, but that being said, it's just the half of the year really now, and we're yet to see a lot of new cameras out, and I'm sure COVID will have affected that. So I think come September, we'll properly see some competitors for what Canon's releasing.
But Sony's one of those businesses that has a finger in a lot of pie, so they actually have a vested interest in getting 8K cameras out there because they want to sell 8K televisions and vice versa. So do you think that will give Sony extra incentive compared to some other camera players who are just make cameras? Yes,
but also the fact that Sony has practically led the mirrorless camera world now for pretty much since it took over Konica Minolta. One of the reasons why there was so much expectation for Nikon and Canon to enter mirrorless was because Sony was converting quite a lot of pros in Nikon and Canon. So while Canon is producing an 8K camera and Sony produces 8K TVs, I think Sony has to get a camera in there regardless that supports 8K just to keep its audience and its buyers happy.
Although it could always have the challenge, and admittedly I've not looked at this for a long, long time, but I know Sony used to have a fairly substantial business in the broadcast camera space, and it might not want to muddle those markets together just yet. I agree with you. It's eventually going to have to do it, though.
Bizarrely, I was on a recent 9 shoot, and I was surprised that the cameraman they sent down actually was using a Sony A-series camera, one of the full frame models that many of us review. So while you're definitely right, and Sony makes a lot of the sensors. Like Sony has a hand in making sensors not just for phone cameras that support 8K, but also some of the cameras seen in its competitors. I suspect this is just a case of Canon has been pushing the idea that it'll have an 8K camera for several months now. I mean, we've known about the R5's existence even before the company actually started talking about what was inside of it this week. I think Sony's keeping its cards closer to itself on this one, and we'll find out what's so special about their 8K camera. Probably, my feeling is probably closer to September or October, simply because that's typically when most of the photo shows are. And since there probably won't be photo shows this year, it'll just be online like everything else.
Yeah, no one's going to IFA.
No one's going to
Be
IFA or
pretty sure of
Photokina.
that.
No,
Yeah.
it just won't happen.
So one of the things that jumped out at me as interesting here is that Canon's talking about free cloud storage. What's the story there?
This is probably my favorite announcement from this thing. Despite the fact I love the idea of an 8K camera and I really want to play with it, I love the idea of this image.canon, which is it's a cloud service that, in theory, backs up your images as soon as you get to a broadband connection. So as soon as you get to Wi-Fi. So the R5 and the R6 both include a Wi-Fi inside of them, which is great. It's good to know that cameras have now support that. And the theory is when you get back to a Wi-Fi connection that you're familiar with, say your hotel when this whole COVID thing is over, or back home, it'll just start backing up. It'll back that stuff up to the cloud. You're given an unlimited amount of space for the first 30 days of that backup occurring. And after those 30 days are over, those images get deleted. So in that 30-day period, you can transfer those images to Dropbox or Google Photos or some other place or back down to your computer again, or you can move them to an allotment they give you of 10 gig of space for the time that you're a Canon ID customer. I think what I like about this is the idea that I've worked on shoots as a photojournalist, as a photo operator, where you're always backing up images. This is before I was a journalist, and it's the worst feeling in the world knowing when a card fails, to be completely honest. You're like, oh crap, now we've got to reshoot that thing again. And sometimes you can't. And this is the idea that you've got some sort of a backup that's automatic, even though it's probably going to hit people's broadband connections in a really negative way. And a part of me, I think that Canon's a bit more hopeful about what hotel internet connections are really like.
I was just
Some
going to
different
say,
hotels to us.
yeah.
Right?
Is it worse when you have a card that might be failing, or when you realise that your connection is failing and your 8K video is going to take 473 years to upload?
That is definitely a part of it. It's something I was critical with when I was talking about. I think the feeling is this is something for now and the future. So at home with our NBN-ish connections where we can hopefully get 20 to 40 megabit upload, uploading large quantities of video is probably going to be still an issue, but at least getting through the images may not present as much of a problem. My issue with this will be if, like I said, when COVID lockdown is over and we're all back to touring the world and doing things of that sort of nature, I'm genuinely concerned what uploading would be like on a wireless network in your hotel, because I know that downloads are bad, but typically uploads are much worse. I love the idea. I think that the idea of Canon offering this is great, and I'm particularly interested to know that if you did happen, for instance, to have a Sony or a Nikon alongside your Canon, you could technically upload using those as well, just using the Canon ID, but you have to use your phone or your computer. But the automatic side of things is something built into their cameras, and that's cute. At least until we find the Wi-Fi network's failing. Then it's not so much cute as just a pain.
You mentioned 10 gig of storage, which doesn't feel like much when you're talking about image and video sizes that large. And typically everyone's play there is, oh, we give you a bit for free and then you can throw more money at us because we want to make money out of this. Can I throw more money at Canon?
I asked them this, and they said no. And they said it's more of a service to help people. If they had to store something that they wanted in the cloud, they could use that 10 gig of permanent storage. They said it's 10 gig of lifetime storage, which raises the question of what a lifetime is. And I found out that a lifetime is basically if you don't use the service for 12 months, then your lifetime is over. So it's a very harsh
Canon
reality.
can afford good assassins.
Right. But so it's not the permanent storage that they give you, the permanent lifetime storage, isn't really, from what my understanding, necessarily a long-term place for you to hold things like Google Photos or Apple storage tends to be. It's more of these are the ones that we might have to move between computer and computer over a 30-day period, because 30 days gives you the ability to offload it to a different storage solution. That's effectively what the unlimited storage is there for. That extra 10 gig, we'll probably see Canon expand on that over time. It's just right now they said that it's just 10 gig and you can't pay them any extra for it.
And it's just these new cameras. If you are an existing Canon user, can you hook yourself into this sweet free cloud?
Apparently, yes. So the new cameras support the automatic uploads, which I'm really curious to try out, given how Wi-Fi passwords tend to change in certain hotels and other things like that. But if you're at home, for instance, the automatic upload is part of those new cameras. Older cameras apparently support this, and it's apparently. It was something technically announced in February, but no one knew anything about it because the automatic side of things wasn't there until these new cameras
were all a
popped
bit
up.
busy in February as well.
We were a little bit busy. There's that as well. But apparently the older models support it, but they don't automatically do it. So you just trigger it once you have the ID in your camera from the actual camera. I presume it's from the touchscreen interface. You'll just press something and it will start uploading, but it's not the automatic thing. This reminds me of when Samsung used to produce cameras. I'm not sure if you guys remember the NX series, but you would basically hook it up to your phone, which at the time many of us had Galaxy Note 4s, and they would automatically share the images to and from the camera to the phone. This is kind of like that, except instead of to a phone, it's just automatically uploading it to the cloud.
Well, oddly, I have a Samsung NX camera literally within arm's reach as we're recording this, but it does bring to mind one of the problems that had. Automatic uploads and backups are great because people are lazy and they forget to do this stuff, and then stuff goes wrong and they cry. But it was a real battery hog.
There's that side of things as well. I mean, the upside, I guess, that we're going to see is the batteries on these cameras no longer require you to actually take the battery out and put it in a charger, which is a pain. They finally support USB Type-C, which is great. You can use the same charger that you use for your MacBook or any other USB Type-C based computer. So at least, there's an easy way of charging your device. My other feeling on this one, this is kind of helpful, is that one of the problems people have with mirrorless cameras, one of the reasons they're losing against phones, is that easy sharing online. It's very difficult to easily share a phone camera online, and apparently this cloud solution will at least allow you to share directly. I hope that means to Instagram and things like that, because it at least means you can upload automatically and then share from your phone. That's great. That'll be handy. But again, sharing a very large image with no edits and other things like that, that's going to be a very interesting question long term.
Well, that just about wraps up another episode of Vertical Hold. Thanks to Lee for making time for the show this week.
Thanks, guys.
Now, if folks want to find more of your work online, Lee, where can they do that?
You can find me at picker.com.au.
And if they want to interact with you on social media, how should they do that?
If you want to do that, you can find me at Lilo, where I'm often talking to Adam and Alex all the time.
Thanks also to Cameron Wilson from ABC News. And you can catch up with us on Twitter at VerticalHoldAU or via the Vertical Hold Facebook page.
And as always, thanks everyone for listening. Try to stay home, try to stay safe, and watch out for my new Netflix special, Escape from Melbourne. Vertical Hold is proudly brought to you by Aussie Broadband, changing the game with their award-winning network and Australian-based support. So later we're going to talk to Lee about, I don't know, because we didn't fill that into the running sheet. Alex, what are we going to talk to Lee about?
Canon's new cameras and its cloud initiative.
All right.
Some of us can improvise,
I can improvise.
When?
Once.
It's long-term improvisation skills.
I'll buy him some improv classes once he can get out of Melbourne.